guys, today I'm going to show you how I made this easy DIY wood drawer front for the entertainment center I am building right now. These drawer fronts are an overlay design, which means they are sitting in front of the face of the cabinet instead of inset in the cabinet. An overlay is a lot more forgiving if you aren't great at woodworking or installing inset drawers. I also like the extra detail that you get, the extra dimension that you get from an overlay drawer front. As you can see, my home is full of traditional woodwork and wainscoting, and I think that this look fits better with the design of my home already. So let me show you how easy it was to make these drawer fronts and give you some tips on how to decide which wood to use, which way you want your wood to lay, and a bunch of other tips that I think come in handy when you are using this design. Including why I use this finish under paint as a primer for my wood. I started by cutting my select pine boards to size. To do this, I used a square and a pencil to mark where I wanted to make my cut. Then I clamped a board onto the select pine board that I was using for the drawer front and used that board as a guide for my circular saw. That way I make sure that I make all of my cuts perfectly straight and square with the rest of the board. The board I clamped onto the end is actually 1.5 inches away from where I'm going to make this cut. Make sure that if you are going to use a straight edge guide clamped to your board, you add on the difference between where the blade is on your circular saw and the edge of that circular saw base is. So I cut these boards to length already and I'm about to put the routed edge on. But I wanted to talk about wood grain in case you guys decide to do this in your homes or on a project that you're working on. As you can see, especially in the two boards on the left, there is a lot of curve in the grain on the ends of that board. That means that board was cut from the center of the tree. If in the future any cupping or movement in this board was going to happen, it's going to tend to want to cup with that curve in the grain. This board here has a little bit flatter grain, so there would be less chance of wood movement in it. But again, I want that cup facing down, so it's going to have the pressure of the furniture behind it, holding it in place and fighting any cupping that could occur over the next 10-15 years. If I left this board like this, facing out, so if this was the front of the piece of furniture, there could be some movement in the ends. I don't know how likely that would be, but you always want to be planning against that. So I just wanted to point that out in case you do use this idea for your next furniture project. Okay, so this is the router bit that I am using for this project. I will put a link to it in the description below if you guys want to check it out. I'm using this Bosch router for this project. I will put a link to the Bosch router and the router bit that I used in the description below in case you need to find it. I picked this bit because of how deep it cuts into the wood. So it puts a really obvious, really pretty design onto the wood, but it is removing a lot of material while I'm using it. So I generally like to make a few passes with this kind of a router bit. Anytime I'm using a router bit, actually, I tend to go back and do a few passes to clean up any edges or just to make the design really perfect and sharp. Make sure you go nice and slow and don't force that bit through the wood. It will cut through the wood and kind of guide itself if you just take your time and are patient with it. Always make sure to let that router get up to speed too before you actually start cutting into the wood. So start that router before you start touching the wood, let it run for a couple seconds so it can get up to speed, and then move on to the wood slowly, making sure to let that router sit flush or flat on the board. I always like to clamp boards down when I am going to use my router on it as well. You don't want that board moving around or shifting while you're trying to route a perfect design onto something that you've already been working hard on. Be sure to take your time on the corners too when you are routing this design onto your drawer fronts. You want to be extra careful around the corners, make sure you get that design nice and crisp, and look down on it from the top and make sure you get the angle centered with the end or the corner of the board itself. It's not hard to get those corners looking great. It just requires a little bit of patience and attention to detail. Make sure you practice on scrap wood if you are worried about whether or not you can do this perfectly. After the drawer front was completely routed, I then just grabbed a sanding block and lightly touched all of the edges to make sure that they were cleaned up and nice and smooth. I used 2 screws at either end of the inside of these drawers and 2 in the middle because they are so long. My drawer fronts are about 3 feet wide or long, however you want to look at it, and I thought they would need some extra help fighting against wood movement over the years. If you are making a much smaller drawer front, of course, you probably wouldn't need 6 screws. 4 would probably do in most cases, so just keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about why I use select pine for this project. Some people like to use harder woods, something like poplar that they can find at Lowe's and Home Depot for projects like this. This project is obviously a very big project. It's pricey enough on its own. I tend to use select pine more often than anything else because it is cheaper than poplar, but I think it holds up just as well in my opinion. Most of the trim work around your doors and your baseboards, your crown molding, most of that trim work in your house is going to be made from pine, and it holds up really well over decades to years of abuse. But I have one trick that I like to use to make that select pine even a little bit stronger than it would have been on its own. Applying Danish oil to wood soaks into the pores of the wood. So with select pine or even poplar, you can apply Danish oil. It'll seep in a little bit and it hardens inside the pores of that wood, hardens in the cells of that wood, and makes that wood more durable and last longer over the years with the same original finish that you made it with. So you can use Danish oil as a primer underneath paint. So I plan on painting this entertainment center with chalk paint later, or latex paint. Actually, I haven't decided yet, but I will come back later with more videos about this project with more tips on different aspects of the build, and I plan on actually making a video about how I'm going to paint this huge build too. So check back, and guys, if you have any questions about this particular DIY, put them in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.